15 minutes, 10-second increment. Give me some ideas what openings you'd like to see. If they're possible, or if there's a popular one, I'll try to play her. Start with e4. I'll start with e4. Well, he kind of dictated things, didn't he? e4, c6. Lots of very, very good options here. We can play d4, bishop d3. There's the two knights, Caro. There's so many different lines. I'm gonna play d4. I think it's the most common move. I also think a lot of people take here. I've played a line like this. I'm gonna play e5, the advanced, and we'll see what happens. c5. I'm most likely gonna take this. This is called the Panov or something. People play this. People play this a lot, and I always caution. I always caution people when it comes to this because it's really easy to get a trash French or a trash Caro-Kann. You can get both of them. So the worst thing you could possibly do is like play c3, bishop f5, and knight f3, e6. Because then you're playing the French structure. This is the French. But the bishop is outside the pawn chain. So it's like a French on steroids. It's also a Caro-Kann on steroids because the pawn's on c5. So, seems a little counterintuitive, but I'm definitely thinking about pawn takes on c5 here. Unusual move, but certainly coming to mind. Because a lot of times you can focus on defending e5, and just develop the pieces around it. Even giving this pawn back. There's one particular structure in chess which is really comfortable, where you they take it back, that's fine. You put a pawn on a3, and then you develop like that. And it's surprisingly annoying for the other side to make progress. So we'll see if we get something similar to that. I'm going to play pawn takes c5. I know it looks really weird, but to my knowledge, this is one of the most testing ways to play. I know it seems obvious to some, like, oh, to beginners, like, oh, sure, I'll take the free pawn. But more experienced players are a little bit more hesitant to take these pawns because, yeah, you're losing control of the center, chasing after a pawn here, and if you end up losing this pawn back, then it doesn't feel like it was worth it. So it's one of these weird cases where a less experienced player might be more likely to play one of the better moves. It's because he's, ignorance is bliss. Okay, queen a5 check. We can be sure of one thing. My opponent wants to take this pawn back, and it looks like he might succeed. Although knight c3 looks tempting because then we take on d5, I'm looking at knight c3, and then I'm seeing e6, and suddenly we have to be quite careful because now we're losing this pawn and our knight's on c3 for seemingly what reason. So knight c3, e6, bishop b5 check, bishop d7. I don't think we're doing it. I don't think we're doing it. So I think moves like c3 here. Queen takes c5. Bishop e3, right? Where does this queen go? The queen goes to c6, which is a square you almost never ever want the queen. You have to be careful of bishop b5. You also have to watch out for like a knight coming to d4, and there's not much you can do about it. And if you move anywhere else, then The issue is, like queen c7, you lose this d pawn. So I think it's a little bit tough here for black after move c3. But similar idea. No matter what, it feels like our next idea is to attack the queen. So either c3 and bishop e3, or knight here and knight here. Both of those moves look like they have the exact same idea, which is attack the d-pawn. Attack and win the d-pawn. Black is being a little forward with queen a5, I would say. Normally, black wants to win a pawn back with one of the minor pieces, but instead, it's going to be the queen on c5. So I think we can harass the queen a little bit. Two options, c3, bishop e3, and knight d2, knight b3. Both look very good. Maybe a matter of preference. Let's go c3. So queen takes, bishop e3. That's what we've been talking about. I think we can gain some time developing here. Have to take this pawn though, because if you don't, you're really inviting this. And b4 is something that I'm ready to play in this opening in general. If I get to defend my pawn and attack your queen, I don't understand. It's too good. It's too good. Gotta take. There we go. Bishop e3, gain some time. Remember, these bishops do a good job at controlling all these squares here. Pawns as well. Even this one. So limited options in terms of where the queen can go. Queen c7, yes, hitting the e-pawn, but at the same time, not defending the d-pawn. So immediately I'm looking at queen takes d5, and probably not going to think too much more than one move ahead. I defend my pawn and I take your center pawn. Worth. Knight f3 defends this next. I have a check I can throw in if I'm in the rush to get castled. And if my queen gets attacked, I think there's a nice safe square on e4. I say safe because I don't see any bishop or knight that can attack me. So it kind of feels comfy there. But if there's one thing, just one thing I remember about this opening, it's just, you know, basically d takes c5. e6. I think queen e4. The only reason I would pause here is whether or not to throw in a check. Like, is that actually useful for me? Don't think so. Takes. We just end up losing this pawn, so stick with what we were talking about, which is use this square as a safe square. And it really is a safe square. I feel comfortable on e4. I can swing to a4 for a check. I can go over to g4 to hit this pawn as soon as the bishop moves. And in the meantime, no knight f6, no bishop to harass me. So knight f3, knight d2, bishop to literally any square. Yeah, so the knight is threatening the pawn. I think we'll make the obvious defensive move. Knight f3, developing and defending. My opponent developing and attacking. And even though it looks like my opponent in the last move or two has come with the threats, it's been two threats. One against my queen and one against my pawn. Admittedly, with the queen, I had to waste some time. but I took a free pawn, so I'll waste one queen move to win a free pawn. But now, after knight there, it would be a mistake, in my opinion, for me to play f4. I think we need to prioritize getting the pieces out. Really poor habit would be like winning material, winning a pawn, and then all of a sudden your next couple moves are moving your queen, moving your pawns. It's like you're forgetting about the whole point of chess, which is to get developed and get castled. Even at the price of a pawn, even for the price of a pawn, you don't want to leave your king in the middle for too long. So, if I can ever accomplish something while developing a piece, it will almost always be better to do that than to do it with a pawn. E5 was attacked. Why would I defend it with a pawn when I can do it with a piece? I know I need to move my piece anyway. What's the point of f4? Can he attack it again? I don't think so. Right? Why not just develop with a piece and continue from there? Okay, knight e7. Can only imagine the next move. Probably knight g6. Me, I'm thinking about knight d2 and nothing but knight d2. Knight a3, though, is catching my eye because knight b5 looks quite strong. It really does. Knight d2, great looking move, but ultimately knight d2 is to play knight c4. So if knight a3 accomplishes the same thing, then I'm interested, put it that way. So I'm liking knight a3. That's an idea here. Knight d2, knight c4. Knight a3, knight c4. The only thing about knight a3 that I would need to keep in mind is, if the knight moves, let's say d5 or g6, bishop a3 is kind of a threat. So, of course, I would have to be ready to move the knight immediately. Knight b5 and continue from there. But I think that's just fine. And it doesn't have to be to b5. We can also play knight c4. So I think knight a3, although close. Close decision. Knight d2 is secure. No problems with knight d2. At a3, knight d2. Tough choice. Question is where the knight wants to go. If the knight goes to g6, I think we're happy regardless. Knight d5 looks a little more annoying because it hits the bishop and ready to... my opponent's ready to get their pieces developed. But I'll stick with my instinct, which is knight a3. Knight g6, knight b5, right? We want to get the knight off that square. It really depends what he does here. I think this move is much stronger than that, because I don't believe that he's winning this pawn. So, and this move is really committal to that winning the pawn idea. Why not bishop b5? Because I don't think I want to give this bishop up if a6 happens. I don't really want to hand him a free tempo like that. It's unclear where my king belongs, right? It's not just like, oh, we want to get castled this way. Castling queenside could absolutely be a tremendous idea here. So the only reason we would move to the side of the board is because we're 100% sure the knight's going to return to action, probably on the very next move, towards the center, but also because we might gain some time with knight b5. Okay, nice move from black. I think this is much better than knight g6, so I definitely give my opponent a lot of credit there. Don't think there's any move I'm really considering other than knight b5. Knight c4 maybe to lend some support here, but seems unnecessary. Knight b5, hitting the queen, and if needed, I can always bring the knight back to d4. We'll see where black puts the queen, because there's a5, d8, b8. I think other moves than that are significantly worse, but those three come to mind. On queen a5, I'm definitely thinking a little bit more in the aggressive direction with, like, you know, maybe b4 or maybe bishop d2. Ooh. This queen d7 move, unfortunately, might be one of my least favorite. For him, I mean. I don't think this is the way to proceed. Yeah. I mean, long castle certainly comes to mind here. a6 is about to happen, so I don't have all day. But yeah, long castle, I think I'm playing without too much thought, because I'm getting a rook exactly where it needs to be. c4 becomes an incredibly strong idea. And after a6, I mean, I really have to think about c4 and taking here. I don't think it's what I'll end up doing, but it's close. Knight d6, takes, with c4 happening next is extremely attractive as an idea. And I suppose the only other move would be knight d4. But I think knight d6 is what we want, because the pawn can't be touched and the bishop's trapped there. So I do like that. c4 takes, gets messy, but perhaps not in a good way for me. I don't like that. Let's play check. Obviously, it has to be taken. And after it's been taken, if black decides to take the pawn, I think the idea is a move like c4 should be strong, and even if my opponent finds a way to hang on to the material, like take the pawn here, I'm feeling pretty good about my chances. Okay, so c4. Obviously, first thing you got to consider, c4. c4, knight f6. Queen has to move, yes. Well, it doesn't have to. Obviously, I could take, but that doesn't really give us anything. Here, knight f6. Queen has to go somewhere useful. Let's say h4. And black could go queen e7. And I don't think we're getting too much there. Bishop c4. Definitely an option. Yeah, like bishop c4. Knight e7 can be played, but then we've got the knight pinned in a bit of a better way. So I feel better about bishop c4 right now. Rook takes d5 would be nice if it worked. There's a pin here, but the queen can take back. Knight g5 when the king castles is going to be a fairly solid attacking move. But We need to make some decisions. I'm thinking bishop c4 makes the most sense. Would love to play c4. Normally, I would say moves like c4 should just work. Because, yeah, there's an obvious pin, but knight f6 is a good move. Gets out of the trouble and hits the queen. So we've given the pawn back. Not by force. Knight d4 or c4 were both possible, but I can safely say like I overestimated this position. I still think it's good for white, but don't think it's that good. He's got his pawn back, and it does feel like there's some path to maybe not equality, but something resembling it. But still, the bishops are going to be very tough to handle here. There's no doubt about that. The knight's currently hanging, so let's start there. F5 or knight e7 or castle. These are the moves that come to mind. Knight e7 and knight d5 instead of knight e7, knight g6 was a really good decision by black in this game. And perhaps knight d6, as I said, I was kind of overestimating the position that I was going to get. I have the two bishops. I'm way ahead in development. I've got the knight pinned to the queen. About to bring the other rook in the middle, maybe. Ideas on the king side. It all looks great, but at the same time, if he castles, we're not killing it. I mean, we're doing well, but we're not delivering checkmate or anything. Does knight f6 still work for black? Absolutely, but you can see the difference is like if it's between c4 and bishop c4 and black can play knight f6, I'd rather use the bishop because if black's going to play knight f6, I'd rather have my bishop here than my pawn here. Then I'll just move my queen, probably keep the queen on the board, bring the rooks to the middle, and I'm happy that I developed instead of moving the pawn. So yeah, knight f6 can happen. I would probably play queen h4. Keep the queens on. And there would still be a threat to answer. Rook takes queen. Long think here for my opponent, who's not only been like playing resilient moves, but using the time, I would say, in appropriate moments. It's hard to guess what move he's going to come up with, but knight e7 certainly seems like the way to keep all the material. Now f5, even though it looks like you're hanging a piece here, you have to watch out for rook takes d5, queen takes d5. hanging your whole queen. Because then I take your queen, you take my queen, attacking the knight as well. Bishop takes back, and I have 3 minor pieces and a rook. My opponent has 2 minor pieces and 2 rooks, so it does not work out for me. So the queen needs to move here. That's for sure. I think queen d3 makes the most sense. And then we might see knight e7. But this position, I think, is getting better and better for me. We could bring the queen over here, but this looks pretty tempting. Because it's threatening to win a pawn, right? Bishop takes d5. Yeah, I would say that queen d3 is maybe a better move. Only slightly, though. Just because it looks like it forces the knight to go here, which I would say is not a great move for black. And I specifically didn't choose queen c2 because I wasn't sure about knight e3. Don't like to hand over a move that attacks my queen with tempo. Hello, Tim. I don't know if you just joined us, but I did literally just say what our variation was and why we didn't play rook takes d5. So I'm guessing you quite literally just turned the stream on. Rook takes d5 doesn't work because of queen takes d5, surprisingly. What if he castles? He can definitely castle here. I'll take the pawn. It's a free pawn. I know it's not much, but I think I'll take it. I am noticing that a2 could be a little shaky, so second guessing myself. But one thing I'll definitely always have is rook e1. So if I can't actually take this pawn, then maybe queen h4 was the better idea, because then there's some stuff around the king to watch out for. So I certainly don't like this move or this situation if I don't have if I don't have the pawn to win, then might not be that good. b5, I think it's a mistake. I think he should have castled. I think he should have castled. Now I truly can win the pawn, right? And in these situations where you think that this is the variation, you should always start with the queen. Force your opponent to win the pawn. When you take with the pawn, I think I'll still do this, but you're giving me an option to potentially do something else, like rook e1, or I don't know. So, yeah, I think that queen d5 is technically the more accurate move, although in this particular case, I don't think I see better than just rook e1. But to give you an idea what I mean, Again, not quite working here, I assume, but a move like b4. And you just can't castle the way you would want to because of maybe bishop c5. So that's sort of what I'm getting at. Still, it's hard for me not to play queen takes d5 here. b4 looks like a little bit too much. Castles. Check, check. Or sorry, bishop here, check. King b2. Rook d8. And yeah, like it's a good position for me, but it's not going to be better than this. What's the difference between when the pawn was here? Is now, after bishop e6, I think we just have rook c5 or rook d6. And there's going to be hanging pieces. Like this knight will be loose now. So that's a big upgrade for me. I don't like my rook on a light square at all. Very bothered by that. Hmm. I think rook d1 is okay. Then if this, we can play rook d7. If this, we rook d6. And here we have that. So I think we can start like this. It's opposite bishops, but there's still a few other pieces on the board. Okay, so here, with the double attack, I think all of a sudden you're going to need to play that, which is quite uncomfortable. And actually, I think it might be a mistake. After bishop b6 or bishop g5, that's hanging, and you can't move it without losing that. A lot of very good decisions made throughout the game by my opponent. If I had to pick one, I mean, it's really nitpicky. He's only 1,000, but maybe b5. I think if he castled or even 97, he had good chances. But b5 loosened up the knight. Imagine in this position, that pawn was back on b7. I mean, it would be around even after bishop takes a2. But even being down a pawn there, just having the knight defended is quite a big deal. Doesn't seem like much. And now it's opposite bishops, but I'm up a piece, so... Bishop b3. We need to do something about this rook. As usual, you know, rook to the 7th is kind of what you want to do. So not really going to put much more thought into it. Rook c7 next, and bishop d4. And then all the pieces will be working together. And a nice way for a checkmate to happen would probably be like that, with knight g5. And I think we can orchestrate a mating net with a bishop, knight, and rook really effectively against a king like that. For example, rook g7. Well, imagine these pieces are there. Rook h7, rook h8 would be mate. Rook g7, king here. Some sort of like knight h7. Knight f6 could lead to a checkmate very soon. When you have a rook on the 7th, like this, and the knight's here and the king's there, remember that these bishop moves are checkmate because the knight covers the squares he wants to move to. So let's go here. So yeah, the plan is bishop to d4, knight to g5, rook takes g7, and think we can get a checkmate here. The pawn being on f5 is so bad, like it's really worse than you think. It being on f7, no threats at all over here. It being on f6, still no threats. But it being on f5, it's like, oh, wait a minute, it's almost checkmate. Just from the pawn being a little bit further than where it needs to be. So we'll see what we can do here, but the bishop, knight, and rook should be able to coordinate quite well, actually. Okay. Yes, we can go here, but after the king moves, was there any real point in doing that? I don't think so. So I'm going to start with the knight, and this is what I was saying. Watch out for these three pieces. I'm immediately threatening an idea like rook h7 and simply checkmate. I'm also looking at knight takes h7, rook g7, and lots of mating ideas there. Knight h7, knight f6, mate to follow. All right, so what mates do we like here? I'm going to hold off on rook g7 for now. Rook h7 threatens like actual checkmate. So this is my favorite move to start off. King to f8. Only way to get out of it. But it does get out of it. Knight h7 threatens checkmate because knight f6, king here is a mate in one. But my opponent has bishop to f7, which is a little annoying. So honestly, if I want things to be forcing, I think they have to start with the checks. So I'm gonna start with this check. I think there were some other great moves there, but well, yeah, remember rook h7, king f8, rook there. There's bishop g8, so I'm not winning any material there. King f8. We cannot give this check as much as we may want to because our rook needs defense. So we check again. The king moves. We check again. Now, if the king goes back, we just move our rook somewhere safe, and this is the checkmate threat. So we can't do that either. So the king continues to run. So we'll give another check. Now, again, the king has to run. And this is kind of what I mean. Like, the rook, knight, and bishop somehow coordinate extremely well on the 7th rank and just in general. So now rook a7 will be winning a rook for real. Rook d7, there's king there. Any rook check here, the king kind of escapes up the board, which I don't really like. So rook a7 looks like the move. Would like to be able to maybe deliver like a real checkmate here. Rook g7, king here, but I'm wondering if it's even possible. Maybe rook h7 check. here and knight e8. It's like I really want to show off more coordination from these pieces. Yes, we have check and take the rook, but I feel like more coordination is in order. The knight's heading to d6, and again, you can see how well these pieces work together. Knight d6 and rook h8 is checkmate because the knight and bishop do such a good job defending all these squares that the king just ends up in a box on b8. So knight e8, knight d6. And the coordination between these three pieces is still unmatched. Check. And we chose h7 specifically, not g7, because I didn't want that square to be covered. All these squares are covered, so it's like a back rank mate. He has a bishop move, but we'll just make sure to take that. As far as I could see, there wasn't anything my opponent could do to avoid that, so. Very good game, in my opinion, from Pseudonist. I mean, this was a near 40 move game. I think myself, I even got a little optimistic here. Like, I liked my castling move, but after a6, although I felt like knight d6 was correct, I got here and I was like, am I doing the right stuff? f5, queen d3. Now, I was thinking that he should castle. And now, I still have a great position. I can just develop. But I was saying, if this happened, this is not good at all for me. So, the interesting thing for me is, if I look at the game review here, for example, I think I actually underestimated, like I think I made a mistake by thinking that my position was not as good as it was. Because we actually had a pretty good read on the position here. Knight b5, best move. Castling is very good, and after a6, knight d6 is best. Takes is best. Bishop c4 is best. Queen d3 is best. And yeah, I was a little surprised to learn, looking after the game, that even when I felt like I had maybe not done things that well, that the computer had more faith in my position than I did. The main reason I didn't love my position was because I knew I couldn't take this pawn. But after castling, it's not like white's position gets any worse. Just bring the pieces in. Because remember, as soon as b5 happens, then I can take just like the game. But he did play very well. And it was not clear to how to proceed. But there were some blunders here. Bishop e6, rook d6 wins immediately. Someone was asking about knight d8. I mentioned it in the game. All I have to do is attack the knight with either of those moves, and the game ends immediately because the knight cannot be defended another time by the bishop. And if the knight moves, you lose the bishop. Plain and simple. So, still, he played really, really well. Good fight. His opening was a little suspicious here. Queen a5. Lots of good moves for white. I think c3 is the best one. Queen c5. We go with bishop e3, and we push the queen around to squares it doesn't want to be on. So, counterintuitive, but in case you guys face this opening, this Botvinnik stuff, d takes c5. There are other ways to play it, but d takes c5, surprising move. You almost never want to give up your center and chase these gambit pawns, but I really like this option here. I think it's quite good.